All right, welcome back to KDVS Davis 90.3 FM. This is a live forum discussion. It's called A Year in Review, the UC Davis pepper spray incident. It's an event brought to you by KDVS News and AggieTV. My name is Mary Champeny, the head news director of KDVS. I am here with several panelists. We have Justin Grove, a UC Davis student, Rebecca Sterling, the president of the Associated Students of UC Davis, Bob Ostertag, a faculty member here, and Matt Carmichael, the current UC Davis Police Department police chief. So we're going to jump right back into our discussion of the pepper spray event. And what I'm going to play now, I have an audio clip from, this is Chief Justice Cruz Reynoso, who headed the Reynoso report. I'm going to play this clip and then ask a question related to it.
I talked to one expert who worked with police departments. He said he had worked with 30 police departments. Of those, only one had the practice and the reality of what he thought every police department should have, and that is that if an officer has something wrong, the other officers will report that. He said 29 out of the 30 did not have that practice and that ambiance. They indeed had what's called a bunker mentality, that is an effort to protect one another. And so it may be that was happening here. What concerns me is that but for the reality of the Crow report finding, I think it's something like 60 tapes about what happened, so they could really analyze what factually happened. Without that, I think folk would have a tendency to believe exactly what was said. And the first thing that the chief said was the officers used pepper spray because they were surrounded and they were fearful for their lives. Well, if without those rather dramatic figures that we saw, I think folk would have believed that, and that would have been the end of it.
Right, so this clip brings up a lot of important points related to the findings of the Reynoso report. Plenty of blame to go around to many different sources for the pepper spray incident, and also the conduct of the UC Davis Police Department. So maybe I'll start with you, Matt. So something that was brought up in this clip was the idea of a bunker mentality of police protecting other police and protecting them from the blame. So if you could maybe speak to that quickly and tell us how the UC Davis Police Department procedure has changed related to events of student protests on campus since the pepper spray incident.
Well, it's no mystery that, our policy's out of date. And I was just showing Bob, I keep our pending new policy, our draft, kind of close to the heart because it's a substantial amount of change. And in our use of force policy, there's a section called duty to intercede that, well, policy is policy, right? I mean, we can have the best policy on the planet, but if we choose not to follow policy, then it is what it is. It's a piece of paper. But in our new policy, we've made quite a few changes. And matter of fact, I don't think a lot of people know one of the unique things back to your first question, what changes have taken place or what's positive. I mean, I'm actually working with or having the ACLU is reviewing our draft policy. In my lifetime, I don't think I would have said that. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but how often does a police officer or a police chief get to work with the ACLU to review policy and get input? Looking ahead, the bunker mentality, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist in the country. I mean, that would not be a truthful statement. I think moving forward, at least I can speak for myself and I can speak for today. I model what I expect. There's no mystery or magic when you see me. I mean, this is who I am. So I think as a police administrator, you're required to be proactive in those areas. You don't just get to sit back and assume, everything's fine. And I'm not saying things are bad, but it's my responsibility to be proactive. And I have to be proactive about talking about just those things, whether it's, I've heard different terminologies, bunker mentality, code of silence. But as the police chief, one, you're required to be proactive within your organization, set a good example, have the right policy. always remember this: we're people, right? I mean, it is an imperfect world. I'm never going to say that I'm not going to make a mistake. I'm never going to tell you that the police department's 100%. We're pretty damn good at what we do, and I am proud of us today. But I can tell you, I'm sorry if this is a long-winded answer, but the answer is modeling good policy, recognizing, talking about it. It's like us talking today about these things. It's not being shy to talk about these particular issues.
Can I have a question? Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So in regards to like bunker policy and like looking forward, I think it's like, how do you account for the fact that like the police have a long-standing history of doing this, of looking out for each other, which in some ways makes sense because you're in an organization together, but then folks who want to report like these crimes don't feel comfortable doing so to the police. Like, how do we take steps to like kind of mend that? And also, how do we not hold police to a higher standards when they are, because you're saying that police are imperfect too, which is understandable, we're all human, but police are not at a higher standard of like code and ethic because of the position and title that they have, and like in this country they have so much like importance put on them and so much power, they should be held to a higher standard.
Right, I'm sorry, I might jump in there really quickly. We are trying to keep this discussion sort of narrowly focused on the pepper spray incident and the UC Davis Police Department, but sort of the ideas that you brought up of holding police to a higher standards and changes within policies, I think Carmichael was able to answer that fairly well, but again, if you have anything to add to that or to sort of address Justin's a little bit more general question.
Yeah, I think they're good questions, and I do think they relate to tonight. We could sit down and talk for a few days.
Yeah.
So it kind of comes back to some of the things we're doing, right? So we're openly looking for, when we talk about standards and accountability, we're looking at an accountability model. Right? I mean, we brought in the person, probably in the United States, that has the most experience, the most knowledge about how to implement an oversight. I have no fear of oversight. People ask me, they go, "Oh, are the cops upset about this oversight thing coming?" And the answer is no. Matter of fact, a lot of my officers probably have more experience with oversight than I do. My other agency didn't have it, but remember, a lot of our officers are transplants from other organizations who do have oversight, so they understand it. The response, and as it relates especially to this past year, is I think you made more of a statement than maybe a question, and I probably agree with what you're saying, most of it, but it is the accountability piece. It is oversight. I mean, what's really cool about us looking at oversight, we've looked in the country. I mean, there's one college university model, which is Berkeley. And I think going back to November, when would we have talked about or sat here and had the opportunity to talk about an accountability model and leading the way? So I think we're kind of saying the same thing.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to move, this is a specific question for Professor Ostertag. So you've written extensively about the pepper spray incident and the university's response to it. A year later, do you feel that the university administration and police force has addressed the shortcomings, especially those that you highlighted in your Huffington Post article on the Reynoso report? And for example, this could be related to the administration and police department's deeply dysfunctional leadership teams. That's a term that you used.
Well, I have to say I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that. I have not been on the inside of the changes that the police chief is talking about here. I haven't been on the inside of the discussions that Rebecca's been involved with the university administration. So I appreciate the question, but I don't. I haven't been on the inside of the changes that have been happening on our campus since that time. So I really can't speak to it.
Okay, all right, then I might sort of narrow the focus a little bit more for Rebecca. So you took office several months after the pepper spray incident. And from your knowledge of previous ASUCD executive administrations and changes, especially since you were part of the Reynoso report and that whole process, so has the pepper spray event changed the office of ASUCD president, the policies of ASUCD, and how they relate to student advocacy and student protests?
Okay. Well, I would say that I think my involvement from the Reynoso task force has not been indicative of my term in presidency. The two just haven't really overlapped that much.
Thank you for that.
But I would say I think that this event has changed a lot about ACCD, not our own structure, but a lot of where our focus needs to be, or just how proactive we need to be with our campus. And that's not just about better engaging ourselves with the rest of the student body and doing better outreach. It is that, but it's also been our relationship with the administration, that it really cannot be just a friendship, but it also can't be just adversarial. When I stepped into office, my first day in office, I had a meeting with Chancellor Davey in her office. The president preceding me had not had a meeting with her until his second quarter in term. And I think that just speaks to kind of how indicative the change of the time was, and how important we both knew it was to make sure we established a working relationship from the start. We're able to be in better communication, and we're able to kind of speak pretty openly and frankly with each other about what issues the campus needed to deal with, and how our different constituencies really saw that needed to happen. Yeah.
All right, great. Using that sort of as a segue into campus life. So after the activism of fall of last year, which the pepper spray was sort of the climax, there was a big expectation that momentum would carry the student protest movement on to bigger events and bring about more reform, not only at UC Davis, but sort of California-wide and, UC-wide and everything. And it turned out that, we had the rally on the Monday following the pepper spray incident when you've probably all seen the aerial photographs of how big that protest was. But that was sort of the height of where we ended up there. So I guess sort of this is for everyone from your perspective and your particular role on campus. Do you think that this sort of sense of student activism and desire for reform, do you think it's still there? Do you think it has petered out? Sort of, I guess this is a related question, but why do you think that this movement sort of just fizzled out?
Should we answer in order? Let's do it in the linear fashion. I think that the sense of student activism has either petered out or not petered out, or like what is up with that. So essentially, I think that, I'm speaking for myself, is that the sense of student activism has been swallowed up by the fact that this incident is still being talked about so much, and that we're not to bash on this thing because this is a great thing, but that it's a focus of a lot of people's energy rather than focusing on what we can do, rather what the administration is not doing for the students. And I think that students also are just trying to figure out how to make sense of where to go. Because now we have these new spaces in the SEC, these institutionalized spaces, which are good, like the LGTRC, the SRC, and the CCC. And those are good, but I think it's easy to get stuck in them and not take our activism outwards. And also I think one of the reasons that a lot of that momentum has slowed down is because most of the people that were kind of leading that charge are now being silenced by the banker's dozen issues. And so I think that is a major factor. They're tied up in lawsuits, and they can't be on the forefront of things. So that's just my perspective.
So I guess I would say when that rally happened on that Monday, there were a lot of issues being addressed. And I think one of the struggles that we've had on campus with some of the demonstrations, even since November 18th, but was also present in the demonstrations then and following, is that there were many issues being addressed. And I think that has made it a little bit difficult to focus people's energy. I know on November 18th, students were protesting and frustrated with our fees, but people were also standing in solidarity with what had happened at Berkeley and kind of representing, these are our sister campuses, kind of that mentality. But then after that, there's the frustration with the lack of connection or understanding or organization or failure of responsibility from our administration. And then there was the frustration with the police department. So I think there are a series of issues that students would like to be active in. and still are frustrated with and feel disenfranchised by. But I think that it did get a bit dispersed. And on that Monday, I would kind of disagree, I think, with an earlier statement about what that rally was about. I don't think that rally was just a call for Chancellor Katehi's resignation, but I think it was a rally to really get people behind this movement and this big issue. But there were so many issues even on that day that were being addressed that I think that got people a bit dispersed.
Again, Bob, you can answer, but I know my question was sort of rambling, so I'll just sort of the point that's to that question. So just for our listeners and for you maybe to organize your thoughts a little bit better. So this is related to sort of the loss of momentum following the pepper spray incident and the rally that happened on campus, maybe the reasons for that, and whether there's still a sense of strong student activism and the problems that we were experiencing back last November.
Well, I'd like to make several points about that. First of all, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work that the students did last year. And, there's a tendency to say, well, this all happened because of the pepper spray or so forth. But really it happened because students stood up and spoke up. That's why all this happened. That's why we have a complete reform of our campus police department. That's why we have a complete reform of the student relationship with the administration. It's not because of the pepper spray. It's because students stood up and spoke out. And it's a testimony to the power of nonviolent protest. And so I want to give credit where credit's due here. Second thing is, you always feel like movements fizzle out. And, now we read about the 60s and we say, oh, there was this movement in the 60s that just went from victory to victory to victory, and wow, too bad we all missed that. That wasn't what it was like at all. Actually, there was a big demonstration, then it all fizzled out. And then a year or two later, there'd be a big demonstration, and it all fizzled out. And this is what movements are like. Actually, people have lives. They have to get back to their books. They have to get back to their jobs. They have to get back to taking care of their kids. So we shouldn't hold a unrealistically high bar of what constitutes a movement that's sustaining itself. Third thing is I'm always reluctant to criticize movement activism because I hate that tendency we have in history to say, oh, if only the activists had been better, so much more could have been done. When actually what needs to happen is more people need to be active, not less. And the people who are actually doing something are the ones who are ahead of the rest of us. So that said, it is important that we criticize ourselves and our own movements. And there's no doubt that I know a lot of the Davis students felt themselves to be part of a national and even international Occupy movement. And that movement fizzled not just here on campus, but all across the country. And I actually have pretty deep criticisms of the whole notion of an Occupy movement, actually. And I mean, we could talk about that, but I think it's pretty limited in its understanding of what it is, and it sets itself up for certain kind of failures, which it's experiencing right now. So I really look forward to some of the students on this campus who have really big hearts and really big social consciousness to broaden their toolkit a little bit. That would be a good thing.
Thank you, Professor Ostertag. That's some really valuable insight from a veteran activist.
Can I add a
yes,
point?
Yes, definitely.
I cannot equal what Bob's saying. I mean, Bob has amazing insight, but I think there are very active students that I think a lot of people don't see. Grad students, undergrads that come and meet with me, especially early on last year who, you know how busy students are, especially grad students working, studying. They come and spend the time, they take the time and come and sit in the police department. We work on policy and we talk about different models and different ways to deliver service and different ways to build partnerships. There are a lot of students that are still very active. I just don't think it's as publicly known.
Thanks. And also to speak to that, I do know the Graduate Student Association, the GSA, did hold a rally on November 16th of this year to commemorate the pepper spray incident. So that's just a very good point you bring up, that there are still active students and definitely still active movements, just maybe not on the scale that we saw last year. Matt, this is another question for you, another sort of very big question. Anyone is welcome to comment on this. So how can student action coexist with police and campus policies that are meant to maintain safety?
Pretty easily. Right? I mean, I think we coexist now. I mean, we've coexisted over the last 12 months. We coexist today. I mean, like you said, there's been activism on campus. You know, Rebecca talked about the event on the 19th. Did you see me there? No. Did I need to be there? No. So I think that's I'm sorry, this is a short, sweet answer. From my perspective, we do coexist. We'll continue to coexist. We'll have bumps, but we'll work through them. It's a willingness to be flexible.
Anyone else like to add to that? Or we can move on. Sorry, was I going to interrupt you?
Well, I'll add that we should all keep in mind that that in a democratic society, well, in any society, protest is disruptive by its very nature. And protest that's not disruptive is toothless. But to my knowledge, there's been no protest on this campus that has been violent. No protest that's required any sort of violent response from any authorities whatsoever. But I have nothing against unruliness in the name of democracy.
That brings up another question that I have. I think that's a good segue, so I'll bring it up now. Again, this is for Matt. We'll move on past the police department procedure in a minute. But many protesters through different town hall meetings and forums that were held after the pepper spray incident have called for reforms in the UCD-PD and the University of California Police Department as a whole, especially in regards to weapons that are held for by police. So what weapons are UC Davis police allowed to bring on campus, in what contexts, and when and how are they allowed to use these weapons? And if you could just say whether that policy has changed since pepper spray.
Well, that's a pretty huge question.
Yeah, again, these are big questions.
So, I mean, I can start with the easiest answer. There are weapons that, we use as a police department, and those vary in their use. Obviously, we have firearms, we have a taser, we have pepper spray, we have the pepper. It's called the pepper ball system, batons. And, there is no real mystery to when those can be used either. I mean, there is federal state law that guides policy. And that has to do a lot with, which is pretty unique with our change in policy currently. The policy, as you know, are outdated. And one of the systems we're currently using to update our policy and actually revise the entire policy gives us a very clear definition, very clear links back each section of policy, whether it's statute or case law. So there's a reasonable standard for the use of force. I think that I think people would be as far as uses of force. I think we looked at 2010 or 2011 at police use of force specific to UC Davis by incident. In a year, we'll probably have about 45,000 interactions between police and the public, between someone in the police department and someone in our community. And the use of force probably, in an average year, in a 12 months, our use of force is probably less than a percentage point. I mean, it's probably, somewhere in the realm of anywhere from 6 incidents to 10 incidences in a 12-month period. And I think that's something that people don't realize, and that's in our policy today and in our new policy that, we will roll out with help from quite a few people. The goal is not for UC Davis police officers to go out and use force. I mean, that's our role is to protect, to keep safe, and the times that we may use force it's in the protection of ourselves or someone else. And I know that sounds like a standard response, but it really is the fact of life. I mean, that is the way it is supposed to be, and that's the way that we carry out our responsibilities. I hope I got it all.
That was good. I think you addressed the points that I was looking for. But maybe if you could just say just explicitly, are there individual policies related to weapons use of UC Davis police officers on student protests? Have there been any changes? I know. So could the pepper spray incident happen again? Is there anything that's been put in place to make sure that students will not be pepper sprayed or sort of an equal kind of force used in the future?
Oh, I think that's a good question. So, speaking today and in the future, it's kind of, I think I've said this to Rebecca when there's been a potential protest or some kind of activism or something going on, and I've said this very thoughtfully that, the police response, if you want to know who directed the police or who responded, you can call my cell phone because it's me. And, one of the changes in our organization is the chief of police, whenever possible, is what we call the incident commander, the person that has that charge for a scene or for an incident. And some of those changes also include having close interaction and communication with the provost or the next executive that's available. I report to the provost. So in the past, if we had an action plan, it would be signed off by the chief of police. Well, that action plan before, and we're not talking about life-threatening events, right? I don't want to confuse this. If there's something really bad going on, someone's going to get hurt or a building's burning to the ground, something terrible that's life-threatening, that's not an action plan. I know what to do. We will respond. But in those times where we have the ability to formulate a plan or there's the need for a plan, that plan also gets approved by the provost or by that next level of executive. That hasn't happened before, and I think that's pretty unique. This is also a good question. If you look at the Edley Robinson report, they have some very unique and very clear language as it talks about use of force and civil liberties and civil disobedience, civil rights. And matter of fact, in our draft, we're looking to incorporate some of that language very specific to civil disobedience and when and who can do what and who can deploy things like pepper spray or pepper ball or who's going to, an action. So those things are in place. We've managed operations plans for the last 12 months that way, utilizing that outside source of extra eyes. I think Edley Robinson said, there needs to be someone from the academic world that's on, kind of boots on the ground, someone there along with police. I think there'll be more change over the next 12, 24 months. I mean, there's things like, that are going on with citizen observer programs. There's independent observers now that are used at various, types of rallies or times where the police arrive, those kind of things. So the change now I think is great. And I think there's probably a substantial amount of change over the next 5 years. I just know that. I think probably nationally.
One obvious change is that the police chief is a new police chief, and Lieutenant Pike is no longer in the police department. And that's a very positive thing, because particularly those students who've been involved in protests on this campus know that the pepper spray incident was not the only incident in which there was inappropriate police behavior. So to go back to the question that we opened this panel with, one could just have easily argued that the previous police chief should have taken responsibility by staying on the job and implementing the changes, and that Lieutenant Pike should have stayed on the job and implemented the new changes. But the university decided that those two people had to go. And so I want to raise again, I don't understand why the chancellor is still there and why that logic applied to Lieutenant Pike and applied to the previous police chief, but did not apply to the chancellor. And the other point I want to make is that I really hope students listening to this, listening to our new police chief speak, are feeling good about the results of activism on this campus. I mean, these are large changes. And this is all, in a way, yes, the movement fizzled out. But in another way, look what's going on today. This is the movement. This is the movement, right? This is what we wanted. And at least to some extent, it's happening. And that's the result of certain things that people did, that students took time out from their other activities to do. And that's a wonderful thing. It makes me very proud of this campus.
All right, awesome. I think with that, we are going to go ahead and head to another music break. We've got about half an hour left of this program. This is the Year in Review, a pepper spray panel forum brought to you by KDVS News and AggieTV. Just another reminder, listeners out there, if you guys are listening to this panel now, if you've missed part of it, or if you would like to hear any of the fantastic answers and insight we've gotten from our panelists, you can head to kdvs.org and you can listen to this panel in its entirety after the fact. Also, if you're listening live and would like to call in and add to our discussion, if you have a question that you would like our panelists to address, please call in 530-752-2777. Thank you to all our panelists, and we'll talk to you again after the break.